Howdy, folks. Roby here with the Manufactured Mind. Today I have a rather comprehensive and extensive podcast episode. But first, I need to say a disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and I'm not here to give medical professional advice. I am merely here to inform based off of information that I have researched myself, and also some of my own philosophy, so to speak, on addiction. Having said, the title of today's episode is The Ubiquity of Dependence, a comprehensive analysis of behavioral addiction, societal norms, and the spectrum of passion. Here's a quick overview of what the podcast will entail. So the summary is the universal mechanism of wanting, the assertion that addiction is everywhere and that everything is an addiction constitutes a profound sociological and neurobiological hypothesis that challenges the traditional boundaries of clinical pathology. Historically, the medical model of addiction was restricted to the abuse of exogenous substances, alcohol, opiates, and stimulants, viewing them as chemical hijackers of an otherwise rational brain. Me personally, I think that addiction is everywhere. I think that everybody is addicted to something, whether it be running, going to the gym, drinking coffee, eating, playing on your phone, doom scrolling, social media. The list goes on, folks. On and on and on and on. And people don't realize just how addicted we are to these things. And it's very easy for somebody to point a finger at somebody who has struggled with substance abuse and call them an addict, when if they looked in the mirror pretty hard, they would realize that they aren't too different. For instance, if you smoke cigarettes, guess what? I bet you're addicted. More than likely, most likely, you're addicted. And there's a lot of people who smoke cigarettes. That's just one thing. And like I said, you can get addicted to running, the runner's high, where you feel like you're lacking something if you don't run that day. It's everywhere. So, however, this query posits a far more expansive and nuanced reality, that the mechanism of addiction is a fundamental feature of human cognition, applicable to domains as diverse as labor, cognition, exercise, and consumption, because you can be addicted to work, too. The distinction, therefore, lies not in the presence of the drive, but in its direction and management, whether the individual feeds a healthy addiction that strengthens the self, or feeds an unhealthy addiction that dismantles itself. This report validates my thesis through a rigorous synthesis of William Glasser's positive addiction theory, Anna Limbach's neurobiological research on dopamine homeostasis, and the dualistic model of passion. It systematically explores the specific domains identified: work, fitness, gaming, cognition, quote-unquote stinking thinking, reading, and eating, to map the trajectory from benign habit to destructive pathology. Furthermore, it examines the second-order consequences of these behaviors, such as the correlation between workaholism and marital breakdown, or the transition from recreational exercise to anabolic steroid dependence. By integrating Dr. Gabor Maté's societal analysis from the myth of normal, this report ultimately argues that in a cultural predicted on chronic stress and consumption, addiction is not an anomaly, but a pervasive adaptive response. Section 1. I put a lot of time into this thesis here, folks. It's quite long, so bear with me. The neurobiological substrate of desire. So, to understand why addiction is everywhere, one must first deconstruct the biological currency of motivation. Dopamine. The user's intuition that addiction transcends drugs is neurobiologically sound because the brain's reward circuitry is agnostic to the source of the stimulus, whether the input is a line of cocaine, a notification on a smartphone, a promotion at work, or the completion of a marathon. The mesolimbic dopamine pathway responds with a release of neurotransmitters in the nucleus accumbens. Sorry. I messed that one up. The pleasure-pain balance and homeostasis. So contemporary research, most notably popularized by Dr. Ann Limbix in Dopamine Nation, conceptualizes the brain's reward system as a balance or teeter-totter. When an individual engages in a rewarding behavior, the balance tips towards pleasure. However, the brain is a homeostatic organ. It cannot tolerate a permanent state of deviation. To restore equilibrium, it exerts a neuroadaptation force, tipping the balance toward pain, a phenomenon known as the opponent process theory. This counter-response is experienced subjectively as a come-down, irritability, or craving. This mechanism explains my observation that anything can become an unhealthy addiction. If an individual repeatedly exposes their brain to a high dopamine stimulus, be it gambling, running, or work, the brain creates tolerance by downregulating dopamine receptors or reducing transmission. So consequently, the individual requires a higher dosage of the behavior to achieve the same effect. The runner must run farther. The worker must work longer hours. The reader must consume more obscure text. This creates the hedonic treadmill, a cycle where the pursuit of pleasure transforms into the avoidance of pain. And so the distinction between engagement and pathology. So while the neurochemical mechanism is universal, the outcome differs based on the nature of engagement. So this is where the distinction between addiction and flow becomes very critical. So flow state. What is the flow state? A state of full task engagement accompanied by low levels of self-referential thinking and high dopamine release, often associated with peak performance and well-being. Flow is typically autotelic, performed for its own sake. Addiction. Addiction is a state where the behavior is compulsive, pursued despite negative consequences, and driven by the need to relieve the pain side of the balance, withdrawal craving, rather than solely to access the pleasure side. So you're driven by the need to avoid withdrawal craving is what addiction is. This query highlights that people can make it a healthy addiction or an unhealthy addiction. This aligns with the neurobiological reality that while the drive, quote-unquote dopamine, is the same, the integration of that drive into the psyche determines its pathology. So a healthy addiction utilizes the dopamine system to reinforce behaviors that build biological and social capital, whereas unhealthy addiction depletes these resources to service the immediate craving, instant gratification. Section 2. The duality of passion, Glasser, and the definition of healthy. So, in 1976, psychiatrist William Glasser introduced the concept of positive addiction to describe activities that, while compulsive, strengthen the self rather than weaken it. This framework is essential for operationalizing the user's distinction between feeding a healthy versus an unhealthy addiction. So, Glasser's criteria for positive addiction. Glasser argued that for an addiction to be positive, it must be non-destructive and self-reinforcing. He identified 6 specific criteria that distinguish a positive addiction, PA, from a negative addiction, NA. Non-competitive. Number 1. The activity is chosen by the individual and is not inherently competitive. Example is running against oneself, not in a race. Number 2, feasibility. It can be done easily, without immense mental effort, to execute well, allowing the mind to wander or focus. Solitude. It can be done alone and does not depend on others, ensuring the individual has autonomy over the dosage. Value. The individual attributes physical, mental, or spiritual value to it. Number 5, improvement. The individual believes that persistence will lead to subjective improvement. And number 6, self-acceptance. Crucially, the activity must be performed without self-criticism. If the individual berates themselves for performance, it shifts into a negative addiction. And I would argue that solitude is absolutely vital for certain individuals in recovery. I don't think that it's for everybody, which I know it's a different context here, talking about solitude, but for me, solitude has been a very, very positive tool. Excuse me. Sorry, I lost my words there for a minute. It's been a very positive tool for me. Whereas I know and I've said this multiple times in other episodes, I know that solitude can be a negative for some people. Like, for instance, if somebody is coming off of substances, your mind's going haywire. Being in solitude for them might not be the best place for them. But for me, it seems that everything clinical or by the book has not worked at all. I've had to completely come up with my own way of overcoming my negative addictions. So moving on, the DMP, the dualistic model of passion. Modern psychology expands on Glasser's work through the dualistic model of passion, which separates harmonious passion from obsessive passion. So harmonious passion, HP, from obsessive passion, OP. Harmonious passion is the activity is internalized autonomously. The person chooses to engage because they love it. It occupies a significant but manageable space in their identity. If they are prevented from doing it, they remain stable. Obsessive passion. The activity is internalized due to intrapersonal pressure. For example, I must do this to be worthy. The activity controls the person. Prevention causes anxiety and frustration. Oh man. So I feel like that I have a lot of obsessive passions. For instance, this podcast is one of them. For the, excuse me guys, damn, really got something in my throat. Prevention causes anxiety and frustration. So for me, I post on social media and stuff when I plan on posting a new episode. And I do that for a reason. I do that not so much to get likes or views or anything like that. It's more of an accountability aspect for me. So if I put it out there to the world that I'm doing this on this day, then I have to do it. I absolutely have to. And see, this is where living in solitude, you have to learn to improvise and adapt and overcome, because there is nobody else here to hold me accountable except for myself. So by me putting it out there into the public eye, saying, I'm going to do this on this day, it it helps me overcome this prevention that happens with me, which I would argue it's more like procrastination. I don't even know if it's procrastination. I think it's something else. I was reading about it earlier. I'm not going to get into it, but I can't remember the term that was used. But it's very difficult for me to even start a task. Once I start it, it's usually great after that. But I have trouble starting things and sometimes finishing things. So the obsessive passion I really resonate with, which I guess I need to work on making it a more harmonious passion. So this theoretical framework provides the lens through which we can analyze the specific examples provided by myself. So like the transition from going to the gym, that would be an HP, a positive addiction, to using steroids, an OP, negative addiction, is a shift from autonomous engagement to controlled compulsion, driven by the need to meet external standards or alleviate internal dysmorphia. So I have a table here in front of me on the screen. One column is positive addiction and harmonious passion, and the other column is negative addiction and obsessive passion. And then we have a feature column on the very left side of them. And on the feature column, we have primary driver, control locus, integration, emotional state, reaction to interruption, and long-term outcome. So starting with primary driver, for the positive addiction and harmonious passion, primary driver is love for the activity or intrinsic growth. A primary driver for the negative addiction and obsessive passion is fear of cessation, external validation, relief from withdrawal. Then the feature control locus. So positive addiction, the individual controls the activity. Negative addiction, the activity controls the individual. Integration. So the positive addiction enhances other life areas, work, family, etc. The negative addiction conflicts with and degrades other life areas. Then we have emotional state, which I'm sure you all can guess. Positive addiction would be flow state, satisfaction, calm. Negative addiction, anxiety, guilt, frantic, busyness, stinking thinking. Reaction to interruption. So, positive addiction, disappointment but acceptance. Negative addiction, agitation, withdrawal symptoms, irritability. Long-term outcome. Positive addiction, resilience, skill acquisition, health. Negative addiction, burnout, injury, isolation, psychological damage. Again, I know isolation is in the negative addiction side. However, there's a difference between isolation and solitude. So isolating yourself is a negative one, but solitude, it can go either way. It just depends on the person. You don't want to isolate yourself, but it's okay to be in solitude. Section 3, the labor of Sisyphus, workaholism, and the destruction of intimacy. So, in some examples, I've explicitly identified work as a primary domain of modern addiction, stating that people get married to their work, and some jobs hire you to be married to your job, which requires you basically to not be married to a partner because you don't have the fucking time. And this observation that I've made is supported by a wealth of sociological and psychological data, indicating that workaholism is a socially sanctioned addiction with devastating interpersonal consequences. The mechanism of workaholism is defined not merely by long hours, but by a compulsion to work, an internal drive that persists even when not required. It operates on the same dopaminergic, dopaminergic, damn, that one was a hard one, dopaminergic pathways as substance abuse, where the hit comes from the task completion, financial reward, or status validation. So the ideal worker, the norm. Modern corporate culture promotes the ideal worker model, an employee who is available 24/7, prioritizing the organization above all else. This external pressure fuels obsessive passion, where the individual's self-worth becomes contingent on productivity. Hustle culture, the societal glorification of the grind, or hustle culture, acts as an enabler for this addiction. Unlike alcoholism, which is stigmatized, workaholism is often praised, making it difficult for the addict to recognize the pathology. And then we have the sociology, quote unquote, married to the job, married to your work. So, research indicates that high-intensity professions effectively demand the emotional and temporal resources typically reserved for a spouse. So, temporal displacement. The average 40-hour work week has expanded to nearly 48 hours for salary employees, with 25% working over 60 hours. This leaves insufficient time for the maintenance of intimate relationships. Psychological absence. Even when physically present, the work addict is often psychologically absent, checking emails, ruminating on deadlines, or suffering from exhaustion. This phenomenon, known as spillover, erodes the quality of the time spent with partners. So the impact on marriage and divorce statistics. The data strongly corroborates my claim that being married to the job precludes being married to a partner. The divorce rate, research by Brian E. Robinson and others, reveals that divorce rates are 40% higher among workaholics compared to the general population. Marital disaffection. Spouses of workaholics report higher levels of marital disaffection, characterized by feelings of loneliness, isolation, and emotional neglect. The relationship dynamic often mirrors that of substance abuse families, where the partner becomes an enabler or suffers from codependency, managing the household around the addict's volatility and absence. And then conflict sources. A 2023 Forbes Advisor survey found that 46% of divorced couples listed career choices as the most common type of conflict, tied with parenting differences, institutional and generational pushback. So recognizing the toxicity of this addiction, structural and cultural counter movements are emerging. So the right to disconnect. Legislations in countries like France and increasingly in regions like Ontario and Australia grants employees the right to disconnect, the legal protection to ignore work communications outside of designated hours. Early data suggests that employees in firms with these policies report significantly lower stress, 28% versus 38%, and higher job satisfaction. However, the effectiveness of these laws is often hampered by the ingrained culture of availability. So the anti-hustle culture. Generation Z is actively rejecting the married to the job contract, phenomenon like quiet quitting, bare minimum Mondays, and lazy girl jobs are behavioral strategies to enforce boundaries and prevent the development of work addiction. They pick some really weird names for that. These movements prioritize work-life balance and mental health over the accumulation of status, viewing the transactional nature of employment with clearer eyes than previous generations. Section 4. The Iron Temple, Exercise, Dysmorphia, and the Steroid Gateway. So, my query provides a specific and insightful trajectory for physical addiction. If you're going to the gym, that can be a healthy addiction, but it can also become an unhealthy addiction because you can start using steroids, for instance. This maps perfectly onto the transition from harmonious passion to obsessive passion. So let's talk about it. From healthy habit to exercise addiction. Exercise is the archetype of Glasser's positive addiction. It releases endorphins and dopamine, reduces anxiety, and builds physical resilience. However, for a subset of the population, approximately 3 to 7% of regular exercisers and up to 7.6% of elite athletes, this habit metastasizes into exercise addiction. Symptoms of pathology. So EA, which is exercise addiction, is distinguished from healthy high engagement by the presence of withdrawal symptoms, anxiety, irritability, guilt, when unable to train, and the compulsion to continue training despite injury or illness. And then the tolerance mechanism. Just as a drug user builds tolerance to heroin, the exercise addict builds tolerance to the runner's high. They must increase the volume, intensity, or frequency of training to achieve the same neurochemical relief. And then we have the steroid gateway, a second-order addiction. The introduction of anabolic androgenic steroids, AAS, represents the escalation from a behavioral addiction to a substance addiction, often driven by the psychological demands of the behavioral addiction. So, the body dysmorphia loop. A primary driver for this transition, folks, is muscle dysmorphia, often called bigorexia. The individual perceives themselves as too small or insufficiently muscular, regardless of their actual physique. So basically somebody could be jacked as all get out and they not think that they're jacked as all get out. So the gym habit alone cannot satiate this distorted self-image, leading the individual to seek chemical enhancement. Mechanism of steroid addiction. While AAS do not produce the acute euphoria of cocaine, they are addictive through two powerful mechanisms. Body image dependence, where the user becomes dependent on the image the drugs provide. Cessation leads to a rapid loss of muscle mass, which triggers intense dysphoria, depression, and a return to use. Negative reinforcement. Physiological withdrawal. Withdrawal from AAS involves severe hormonal crashes, hypogonadism, leading to fatigue, insomnia, loss of libido, and suicidality. Then polyaddiction. Research indicates a strong correlation between exercise addiction, eating disorders, and AAS use. The gym, ostensibly a place of health, becomes the locus for a complex polyaddiction, where the behavior, the cognition, and the substance reinforce one another. So, section 5, folks, the cognitive loop, quote unquote, stinking thinking and emotional addiction. So, people can have a stinking addiction. In the context of addiction recovery and psychology, this refers to stinking thinking, a term used to describe the addictive nature of negative cognitive patterns. This is perhaps the most subtle but pervasive form of addiction to one's own suffering. The neurobiology of rumination. Rumination is the repetitive focusing on distress and its causes can be conceptualized as an addiction to negative neural pathways. And folks, as much as I hate to say this, I think that I might have this. Because I very much so get stuck in a rumination, worrying, stressing myself out about things that have not happened ever, things that haven't come yet, the future. And I struggle with overcoming this, quite honestly. I really do. I have the stinking thinking. And it debilitates me some days, man. It really does. Like today, for instance, I was ruminating before I started recording, and it was preventing me from recording. I was delaying recording the podcast. I'm like feeling fatigued, drained. I was excited to do the recording, but then I lost the drive, and due to some other issues that I have that I'm not going to talk about on here because it's a little too TMI. And the shit stresses me out. And so I get to thinking and overthinking, ruminating on everything that I want to do, but in that moment of dealing with the other health issue, I can't. I actually can't do anything in that moment. And so it just leads me to stinking thinking. So, moving on. The dopamine of worry. Why would someone be addicted to feeling bad? Evolutionary psychology suggests that worry feels like problem solving. It gives the brain a false sense of control over potential threats. The perception of control releases a minute amount of dopamine, reinforcing the ruminative loop. And then habit formation. So over time, these negative thought patterns become the path of least resistance. The brain, which seeks efficiency, defaults back to the worn groove, of negativity rather than the effortful path of optimism or realism. And so, stinking thinking in recovery, in the addiction recovery community, stinking thinking is identified as the precursor to relapse. Wow. It involves specific cognitive distortions that undermine sobriety. Distortions. Common patterns include euphoric recall, remembering only the good times of using, terminal uniqueness, believing one is different from other addicts, and victimhood, blaming the world for one's problems. So, well, I don't do any of that, so good on that one. And then the dry drunk, an individual who abstains from the substance but continues to engage in stinking thinking, is often referred to as a dry drunk. They have removed the chemical but retained the addictive personality structure, obsessive, resentful, and rigid. Wow. Folks, I think that I might be a dry drunk as far as stinking thinking goes. That's interesting. It's something I've really been working on too, the whole ruminating and worrying, man. It's been a part of my life since I was a child, I not blaming anybody or anything, but as a child, I didn't know what to think when my parents divorced, man. I thought I was the cause of it. I felt like the tug of knot or the war shit. The knot and the tug of war rope. That's what I felt like. Being pulled one way or the other. One way or the other. The whole time. So it made it feel like that the divorce was over me. They're fighting over me. And I feel like it also has some kind of impact on me receiving attention, so to speak. Because that was like a lot of attention centered around me, but in kind of a negative way. Because my parents went to court over custody. I had to be there. I had to talk to the judge. It was fucking ridiculous. And quite frankly, at that time, I wanted to go live with my dad. And he wouldn't let me. The judge would not let me. You want to know why? Because my stepmom was not old enough to be a mother. You know how old she was? 20. She was 20 years old. 1 year younger than my mom was when she had me. 20 years old, folks. In 1997, 20 years old was not old enough to be a mother, according to this judge. So, having said, I ended up not going and living with my dad. Why did I want to go live with my dad? At the time, I didn't know. Reason. I was asked this question by the judge, by the way. And when you ask a 7-year-old something like that, what exactly do you expect them to say? Do you really expect me to sit there and even be able to process or think about, oh, I want to move to my dad's because he has a wife and therefore a non-broken household, whereas at my mom's, it's just mom. But I told him that I wanted, because my dad played ball with me outside and played with me and spent time with me. That's why I told the judge I wanted to move to my dad's. And so he said no, because my 20-year-old stepmom wasn't old enough. Didn't make any sense. But anyways, kind of went off track there, folks. But that's the cause of my worrying was and overthinking is because I felt like the knot in a tug of war rope. I felt like I was the problem or the cause. And therefore, I was constantly worried about, am I doing the right thing? Is this going to make this person like me? Is this going to make dad like me or love me more? Is this going to make mom like me or love me more? And by product, that became and act in general public for me. I started thinking that stuff. Does this person like me? Why not? If they don't, you know, it would really bother me if somebody didn't like me, and I would worry. I worry about everything, and I still do. Nope, not saying it. I refuse to. I get getting better at it, but I refuse to say trying. I replace trying with I am working on, or I'm doing my best to, etc., etc. So I'm doing my best at getting better with this rumination shit because it is, like I've explained, very unhealthy. But moving on, OCD and the addiction to thought. Obsessive compulsive disorder represents the clinical extreme of cognitive addiction. Obsession as craving. The obsession. Intrusive thought acts like a craving. And by the way, I got diagnosed with this as a kid. Compulsion as fix. The compulsion, ritual, or mental check acts like the drug, providing temporary relief from the anxiety. This cycle mirrors the addiction loop perfectly. Trigger, craving, behavior, relief, trigger. So, treatment as detox, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, acts as a detox for the mind. It trains the individual to recognize the urge to ruminate or obsess and consciously choose a different response. Response prevention, effectively starving the addiction, which I have been working on doing. And how I've been working on doing is actually has nothing to do with anything I just said. It has to do with Eastern philosophy and separating the mind from the body. So when I have these intrusive thoughts, the mind essentially is already knows what I'm going to do or how I'm going to act. So I need to be in control of my mind. Therefore, I need to separate the mind from the body, in a sense, if that makes any sense to anybody, so that I can distinguish, this is just my mind being a mind and me. You know what I'm saying? So, visualizing my brain, literally my mind being outside of my body, is how I've been coping with this stuff. The rumination and shit like that. This is how I've been attempting to address the issue. And as weird as it may sound, I actually learned this from Dr. K on YouTube, on his podcast. Shit, what's it called? Healthy Gamer. Yep, Healthy Gamer. Dude is insightful, man. Very insightful. He's a psychologist. Very nice, seemingly nice guy. And full of wisdom. I would highly encourage people to go listen to his podcast, actually. And no, he's not a sponsor. So moving on. Section 6. The digital Skinner box. Gaming and the gamification of existence. So this domain offers the clearest evidence of how modern industries weaponize human psychology to manufacture addiction. Keyword, manufacture. Turning everything into a Skinner box. So, there's a disorder called IGD, Internet Gaming Disorder. The medical community has formalized Internet Gaming Disorder in the DSM-5, the Diagnostics and Statistics Manual, which is the psychology Bible, acknowledging it as a condition where gaming causes functional impairment. Prevalence. Studies in populations like Chinese adolescents show a prevalence of 4.6%, with symptoms including withdrawal, deception about time spent playing, and the loss of interest in other activities. Mechanism of entrapment. Video games are designed using variable ratio reinforcement schedules, the same psychological mechanic used in slot machines. A player does not get a loot box or a rare drop every time they get it unpredictably. This uncertainty generates a high dopamine spike, then a predictable reward, driving compulsive behavior. There's a lot of psychology behind gaming, folks, and they do it for a reason. So the gamification of healthy habits. So my point that everything can be an addiction is further validated by the trend of gamification. So apps for running, learning languages, or even meditating now use these same addictive mechanics, streaks, badges, leaderboards to compel usage. The double-edged sword here, while gamification can help form positive addictions, examples would be a Duolingo streak encouraging daily study via operant conditioning. It risks shifting the motivation from intrinsic to extrinsic. So it shifts it from learning for knowledge to learning for the streak. Dark patterns. Designers, and this is what I was talking about, designers openly discuss making apps quote-unquote sticky, addictive. When a user feels genuine anxiety over breaking a meditation streak, the tool for mental health has ironically become a source of addictive stress. This blurs the line between a helpful utility and a behavioral trap, fulfilling the user's prophecy that any activity, or fulfilling my prophecy rather, and that any activity can become an unhealthy fixation. Section 7, the consumption spectrum from bibliomania to binge eating. Finally, I challenge the notion that only drugs are addictive by listing reading addiction and eating addiction. Both domains reveal the complexity of consumption-based dependencies. So bibliomania, the gentleman's addiction. The inclusion of reading addiction is something I've noticed that I'm starting to seemingly get this. The inclusion of reading addiction is historically significant and highlights the cultural relativity of addiction. Historical panic. So, in the 18th and 19th centuries, novel reading was pathologized similarly to drug use. Critics like John Kellogg warned that excessive reading overstimulated the imagination. It ruined posture and detached individuals, particularly women, from reality. The term bibliomania was coined to describe the obsessive collection of books. So, modern manifestation. Today, bibliomania often manifests as sundoku, the buying of books without reading them, or as a form of escapism. While reading is generally a positive addiction that enhances empathy and cognition, it becomes a negative addiction when used to disassociate from life's responsibilities, functioning as a numbing agent similar to alcohol. And then we have food addiction, the controversy of necessity. So eating addiction is a contentious but vital category in the addiction landscape. The biological reality. Research suggests that ultra-processed foods, ones that are high in fat, sugar, and salt, trigger the brain's reward system in a manner indistinguishable from cocaine or opioids. The Yale Food Addiction Scale identifies symptoms such as tolerance, which is needing more to feel satisfied, and withdrawal, agitation when cutting back. The challenge of abstinence. Unlike drugs or alcohol, where the goal is abstinence, one cannot abstain from food. This makes eating addiction uniquely difficult to treat, requiring a harm reduction model. And so overlap with disorders. So there is significant overlap between food addiction, binge eating disorder, and obesity. However, not all obese individuals are food addicts. Not all food addicts are obese. The addiction label helps explain the compulsive nature of overeating that defies logical health goals. I've got another table here, the spectrum of consumption addictions. And so I've got four columns. Sorry. The first column is the domain. Second column, healthy and positive manifestation. Third column, unhealthy and negative manifestation. And fourth column is a mechanism of pathology. So, domain number 1 is reading. So, a healthy manifestation would be learning, empathy, building, relaxation. Unhealthy would be escapism, hoarding, so with sundoku, social isolation, and then a mechanism of pathology, disassociation from reality, compulsive acquisition. Domain 2, eating, healthy manifestation, nutrition, social connection, culinary enjoyment. Unhealthy manifestation, binging, emotional eating, obesity, shame cycles, and the mechanism of pathology. Dopamine dopaminergic spiking from ultra-processed foods. Numbing of emotion. That word gets me every time. Dopaminergic. Dopaminergic, I think is how you say it. Okay, domain number 3, gaming. Healthy manifestation, social play, cognitive challenge, stress relief. Unhealthy manifestation, isolation, neglect of hygiene and work, financial loss. And then the loot boxes within the game. Mechanism of pathology for gaming, variable ratio reinforcement, and escapism. Then we have work. So a positive here of manifestation would be career fulfillment, financial security, and contribution. Unhealthy manifestation would be burnout, divorce, inability to rest, identity fusion. And then the mechanism of pathology here for work is validation seeking and avoidance of intimacy and self. And a lot of the jobs that I would argue that requires you to be married to your work is the 3-letter word organization, 3-letter organizations like CIA, DEA, FBI. You would argue that the military, unfortunately, is one of those because a lot of women can't seemingly keep their hands to themselves when their husbands are away on deployment. Now, not saying that that's all women, but a lot of them, that's them. And it's fucked up. So, I'm just trying to give you examples of what jobs require, like a detective, for instance. Maybe a lawyer, maybe a doctor even. I'm not sure what the doctor life is like, but from my experience in life and the friends that I have and what I've seen, definitely military, definitely law enforcement, like the FBI, the DEA, the CIA, stuff like that, really requires you to be married to your work, more so than your spouse. So there's a huge selfless act that is taken, or rather needs to be taken, because the selfless act of serving your country is one act. The selfless act of giving up basically your wants in life, like basically giving up a spouse, or the possibility of ever having a spouse, if you, depending on how long you want to stay working at these places. That's a very selfless act, but it can be selfish really quickly if you get into a relationship and your spouse feels disconnected from you. Then that's when it starts becoming like, oh man, is this selfish of me to be working like this? But then you got to think, maybe it was selfish of you to even get in a relationship, knowing what the job requires. Not saying that that's the case, but I'm just saying that some thoughts that maybe should be going through your head if you're in one of those kinds of jobs. But if you are, and you are married and it's working out, then great. More power to you. By all means, share your advice, because there are plenty others out there who don't have that. All right, folks. So, section 7, societal pathology, the myth of normal. So my comprehensive list of addictions other than substances, from work to gym to reading, ultimately points to a systemic issue. If addiction is this ubiquitous, it cannot be merely an individual flaw. This aligns with the work of physician and author Gabor Maté. Trauma and the void. In the myth of normal, Maté argues that addiction is not a random disease but a logical response to suffering. The function of addiction. Addiction is an attempt to solve a problem, the problem of pain, trauma, or a void in the self. Whether the individual uses heroin to numb physical pain, work to numb insecurity, or steroids to numb body dysmorphia, the function is the same: self-regulation of a dysregulated nervous system. Excuse me. The toxic culture. Maté suggests that modern society, with its isolation, breakdown of community, and chronic stress, quote-unquote hustle culture, is toxic to human development. It creates the trauma that necessitates addiction. So, society as the addict. Our economic system itself operates on addictive principles, requiring constant growth, tolerance, and in consumption, craving to function. Therefore, addiction is everywhere because our culture is designed to produce it. And so we arrive at the conclusion, folks: navigating the addictive landscape. So my thesis is essentially correct. Everything is potentially an addiction, because the capacity for addiction is woven into the very fabric of the human brain's survival mechanisms. The mesolimbic dopamine system does not discriminate between the survival value of food in the artificial high of a steroid or a slot machine. However, my second point is equally vital. People can either make it a healthy addiction or an unhealthy addiction. This distinction between Glasser's positive addiction and the destructive negative addiction is the key to navigating modern life. So healthy addiction or harmonious passion is characterized by autonomy, integration, and the enhancement of the self. It is the runner who finds peace on the trail, the reader who grows through books, and the worker who finds purpose in their craft. And then unhealthy addiction or obsessive passion is characterized by compulsion, conflict, and depletion of the self. It is the steroid user destroying their endocrine system for an image, the workaholic losing their family for a title, and the gamer losing their life to a screen. So, final recommendation: to survive in a world where addiction is everywhere, one must become an architect of their own dependencies, and this requires three things, folks: vigilance, boundaries, and compassion. So let's break these down. Number one, vigilance. Recognizing the stinking thinking and the early signs of obsessive passion, anxiety, rigidity. Number two, boundaries. Enforcing structural limits. Right to disconnect. Digital Sabbaths to prevent the hedonic treadmill from accelerating. And then three is compassion. Understanding, as Maté suggests, that the addiction is often a soothing mechanism for underlying pain and addressing the root cause rather than just the fucking symptom. How many times have I said that in my episodes? You gotta treat the cause, not the symptom. And that's what the pharmaceutical industry is built all around, is treating those symptoms. It's fucked up, man. So, in the end, we are all addicted to something. The goal is not to eradicate desire, but to choose addictions that allow us to live fully rather than those that consume us. And that, folks, is going to do it for today. I hope that everybody has enjoyed this episode. I hope everybody has gathered something from this, the Ubiquity of Dependence episode. And I truly do. I truly hope that this comprehensive analysis of behavioral addiction and societal norms and the spectrum of passion has truly informed y'all, even inspired you, and encouraged you to be more vigilant, to set those boundaries, and to recognize, the positive addictions and the negative addictions. That's my goal, folks, is to just merely inform you, and what you do with the information after this is on you. But I would highly encourage you to consume as much of this as you can, because I put a lot of time into putting this together. For one, I've read some of Gabor Maté's books. In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts is one that's really good for addiction. I would encourage you to read those. He's got more than just that one, as I mentioned the one in here in the episode. So, having said, chin up, chest out, walk tall, and stay frosty, folks. Semper Fidelis. It's Roby with the Manufactured Mind. Peace out.